Do you believe in blood over everything, or not anymore?
Dad raised his glass and did that proud voice he reserves for moments when he wants everyone to look at him, telling the table that my sister just landed a huge promotion, calling her the future of the family, asking me when I would finally grow up and stop bouncing between hobbies like I was still in high school, and I felt that familiar tug in my chest, not pain exactly, more like the same old bruise they keep pressing as if they are checking whether it still hurts. I smiled, because I have learned that a smile disarms people who expect a fight, and I said that I already did grow up. I just did not tell the people who would not celebrate it, and you could have heard the fork drop from across the room. My sister blinked like she missed a cue. My mother tried to smooth it with a laugh that did not land. My father stared at me the way you look at a puzzle you are sure you solved last year and cannot believe is back on the table. I did not make a scene. I did not need to, because they had already made it for me, once again writing the label on my back like they always do, the responsible one but not special, the steady one but not star material, the one who shows up, helps out, and should be grateful that she gets a chair. That line about growing up was not a dagger, it was a boundary, and for once I let it sit there without walking it back, without softening the edges so everyone could stay comfortable while I swallowed whatever came up for me. My sister, Hannah, tilted her head with that practiced concern that always sounds like a performance, and asked what I meant, and whether I was okay, and whether she should step outside with me to talk, which would have looked caring on camera. Except there was no camera, there was just me remembering every holiday where she got a toast, and I got the bill when no one was looking. The thing about being treated like the understudy is you learn how to do the job without applause, and I have been doing the job for a long time. I paid my rent without calling home. I changed jobs without announcing it, kept my head down, learned what I needed to learn, and built something that belonged to me. I listened to their lectures about responsibility while quietly handling responsibilities that were not mine, because that was the deal no one said out loud, that I would be the net beneath everyone else and pretend that it was not there. Dad loves a clean story, so Hannah's promotion makes sense to him, and my work does not, because my work does not fit into a neat title he can brag about between dessert and coffee. It is easier to call me childish than to ask what I am actually doing, because asking requires humility, and humility never got a seat at our table. I looked at him and said I was fine, and that I was proud of Hannah, which I am, even if I am tired of being told to clap louder for her than for myself. He made a joke about how pride is nice, but a stable job is nicer, and everyone chuckled the way people do when they do not want to be the only one not laughing, and I felt the room lock into the old script. That sticky pattern where I am the punchline, and they pretend it is good fun. That was the moment I decided I was done handing them the setup. I did not flip the table or storm out, because that would have given them a tidy scene they could point to later and say I overreacted. I just sat there and let the silence do the work, because silence can be louder than an argument when the right truth is hanging in it. Hannah tried a softer angle, asking if I was seeing anyone, as if a boyfriend would be the missing ingredient that finally makes me presentable, and I said I was seeing my future very clearly, and that was enough for now. Mom shifted in her chair and offered that I could always move back home for a while if money was tight, which would have been kind if it were not wrapped in the assumption that I am one bad week away from falling apart. Dad nodded like a judge delivering a sentence and told me to think about getting serious next year, maybe go back to school, maybe apply to something with a ladder, and I felt the old reflex to explain myself rise up like a wave, then pass. Because I do not owe anyone a seminar about my life to prove it is real. I kept my face pleasant, reached for my water, and under the table I slid my phone open with one thumb and tapped into a screen I know better than I know their approval, the one where the transfers sit lined up like obedient soldiers waiting for my permission to move. There is a line item there that they have never seen with their own eyes, a quiet payment that props up a story they like much better than the truth, and I looked at it the way you look at a habit you have outgrown. I did not make a speech. I did not ask for thanks. I simply toggled one setting, watched the confirmation pop up, and felt the smallest click inside me, the sound of a door closing that should have been closed a long time ago. The table went on with its chatter, the compliments for Hannah, the teasing about my timeline, the little digs dressed as concern, and I just nodded along while the first domino fell, slow, silent, and deliberate. When I think about why that one line at the table landed the way it did, I have to admit it was not courage that made it come out so calmly. It was practice. Because I've been rehearsing that boundary in my head for years while I learned how to live without turning every step into a family performance, and somewhere along the way the quiet became my ally, not a punishment. Since the fewer updates I gave them, the freer I felt to make choices that were mine without waiting for a committee vote. So I found work that did not need a title my father could recite at barbecues. I learned skills that did not photograph well. I became the person people call when there is a mess, and they need it solved without drama. And I built a small business that pays on time. Not because it is flashy, but because it is useful, and the more useful I became to the world outside this house, the less I needed anyone here to clap for me. Back when I tried to share good news, the room would twist it into a comparison game. Like the time I finished a certification course and my father said finally in that way that turns achievement into an apology, while Hannah immediately asked the salary band so she could stack it against hers. And it was in moments like that when I started to feel allergic to applause that came with a scorecard, which is when I set the rule that changed everything, that I would only share my life with people who were capable of being happy for me without asking how it makes them look. The funny thing about being dismissed is that it buys you privacy, and privacy gives you time to build things that do not require permission. So I took a job that paid the bills, and then I took on clients after hours and on weekends. And I learned to negotiate without flinching, to send invoices without shame, to say no to people who wanted discounts because they knew my sister, and I kept going until one day the math said I could buy a small place of my own, which I did without ceremony. No house tour. No call to dad for advice about interest rates, no photo with a key under a bough, just a folder of signed papers in a drawer and a monthly payment that comes out of my account like clockwork. A private proof that I was not waiting for anyone to declare me grown. I never told them, not because I wanted to be sneaky, but because I've learned that good news in this family is a currency that gets taxed with backhanded remarks, and I did not feel like paying anymore. I wanted to know what it felt like to reach for a doorknob and not wonder who was holding it open for me and how I would be expected to repay that favor with silence later. Silence is not the same as absence, though, and it is not weakness either, which is why the same people who call me unserious have been living steadier because of me, a detail no one notices, because I do not announce it. It started with a so-called bank error that kept happening near the end of each month on my parents' mortgage, a late fee here, a wobble there, my mother sighing that she would call and sort it out, and I could hear the dread under her cheerfulness, so I took a deep breath and told her I would handle it, and I did, and then I set up the thing that would make sure it did not happen again, automatic payments drawn from an account in my name with a label that would look like a general fund if anyone glanced at it, which no one did. Because why would they? They were busy praising Hannah for being a star while their roof stayed paid for by the person they called the sensible one. From there it grew the way helpful habits do, almost by accident, because the student loan that Hannah swore she had under control began to hiccup when she boosted her lifestyle before her raise cleared, and she called me in tears asking for advice and promising she did not need cash, just guidance. And I said I would talk to someone I trusted and see what could be done, and I did, and again I set up payments from the same quiet channel, and then I went back to my life and let them enjoy their story that the family was thriving on discipline and brilliance, never mentioning the scaffolding under it with my name stamped all over the beams. I kept receipts, not because I planned to shove them in anyone's face, but because I have learned to keep clean records of anything you might one day need to end without a fight. And I put every confirmation and notice into a neat archive with clear names and dates, so that if the day ever came when I needed to pull my hand back, I could do it with one motion instead of a messy argument. It turned out that this was the one skill no one in our house ever taught me, how to turn a boundary into a system so that it holds even when you feel generous, because generosity without boundaries is what got me here, paying for things in the dark and then accepting lectures about maturity in the light. So when my father decided to be a comedian at dinner, I did not improvise. I executed something I had prepared for a long time, which was the choice to stop being their invisible safety net. And after I toggled that first payment, I opened the other tabs that sit behind it, the ones that control the so-called general fund. the permissions at the mortgage servicer that let a third party initiate payments, the alert rules that send notices to my email instead of theirs, and I drafted the messages that would echo once I hit send, polite and simple and final, saying that the authorized payer was withdrawing, that the account would revert to the borrower, that future communications should go to the names on the note. I scheduled everything to land after the holiday weekend, so no one could say I ruined a family moment, lined up like a row of dominoes that would fall the moment the first bill tried to pull from an empty lane. And then I put my phone away and looked up at the people who think I am the one who needs to get serious, and I smiled because I knew the timer had started, and that the first letter would arrive at my father's house on Monday afternoon with his name on it and a balance he assumed belonged to his legend. People like my father believe power lives in job titles and speeches at crowded tables, but the longer I kept my head down and watched the way our family actually functions, the clearer it became that real control sits in the unglamorous places where bills get paid, passwords get changed, and deadlines get met without a fuss, and that is where I set up camp. Not because I am a saint who enjoys being invisible, but because quiet control lets you decide when the lights go on and when they go dark. And once I saw it that way, I stopped chasing applause and started building systems that would not fall apart the moment someone in this family felt slighted. The joke is that they called me unserious while they leaned against walls I reinforced, bragged about stability I maintained, and treated me like the cautionary tale while standing on floors I paid for. And after enough years of this, I realized I did not need to drag anyone into a fight to get justice. I only needed to step back and let gravity do the job it has been waiting to do since the first time I was asked to fix a mess without telling anyone I touched it. The list of things I kept running for them would look ridiculous written out, which is exactly why I wrote it out and kept it in a neat folder, because if you live in a house where the scoreboard matters more than the truth, you learn to keep receipts like armor. The mortgage autopay that I set up after the so-called bank errors, the top-ups when escrow came up short and property taxes threatened to punch through, the homeowner's insurance that my mother thought magically renewed itself each year. Because the premium never bounced, the small balance on a hospital bill that my father said he would knock out but somehow remained a shadow on their credit report until I pushed it into the light. The student loan on my sister's graduate degree that she insisted she was managing brilliantly while her new designer bag introduced itself to the family group chat. Even the little things like the family plan on a streaming service everyone used and my card carried, there is nothing heroic in any of that, but there is a kind of leverage in it, the kind you do not wave around because the point is not to humiliate but to correct, and the cleanest correction is to stop doing work others pretend they were doing all along. So I pulled the cord the way a careful person does, not with a tantrum but with procedure, and I started where the weight was heaviest and the lesson would be clearest, which was the mortgage. And I withdrew my authorization and filed the notice that future pulls would be rejected because the third-party payer no longer consented. And then I moved to the student loan servicer and removed the external account that had been quietly clearing the gap between what my sister promised and what she actually sent, and after that I terminated the recurring insurance payment and returned ownership of the policy to the named insureds with a bland note about updated billing preferences. And I did it all with dates that took effect after the holiday, so no one could claim I ruined the weekend, because I am not trying to torch anything, I am closing an unpaid tab. I redirected every email alert to the people whose names are on the contracts, and I turned off the catch-all inbox rule that had been shielding them from the consequences of their own neglect, and then I signed out, not because I needed a dramatic exit, but because the point had never been noise, it had always been clarity. I wanted one message to land that could not be spun into pity or scolding, so I opened the archive I have been keeping for years, the clean record of every payment with my name on it, and I stitched the essentials into a single document that anyone could follow without getting overwhelmed. A tidy chronology with dates and amounts and confirmation codes laid out like a calm answer to a question no one had the courage to ask. And I sent it to my parents and my sister in a single email with a single line above it that read, "Please keep this for your records." Effective immediately, all accounts revert to the named borrowers and policyholders, and then I put my phone face down and let that land where it needed to land. It was not a scream. it was a mirror, and if anyone felt judged by the reflection that is between them and the story they have been telling about themselves. While I was at it, I cleared out the petty ties that made it too easy for them to pretend I owed them explanations, little strings that drag you back into arguments you never needed to have. The second line on the family streaming account that always defaulted to my card, the emergency credit card my mother once asked me to hold, which had become a backup for my father's absent-mindedness. The spare key to my place that kept finding its way into conversations about whether I was safe on my own. I drove to their house and slid the key back across the entry table and told my mother, as gently as I could, that I was not a bank and I was not a secret landlord and I was done being a shadow-fixing machine. And I walked back to my car without waiting for the speech I knew my father was composing in his head. None of this was cruel, and none of it was even loud, but it was the first time my actions matched my boundaries, and that, more than any headline at a holiday dinner, felt like growing up on my own terms, which is why when the first alert hit the family inbox on Monday afternoon, and the second one followed, and the third one lined up right behind them, I did not rush to explain or cushion or translate, because the next step is not mine anymore. And the next conversation will happen on my terms, and the next person to ask me to fix anything will have to use the right language, which starts with the truth. The first alert hit my father's inbox before lunch with the kind of bureaucratic politeness that leaves no room for pride. A notice about a payment that did not clear and a reminder that grace periods are not bottomless. And before I could finish my coffee, my phone lit up with a message from him that was not a question so much as a command to call immediately, which I let sit there until the second alert arrived and then the third. Because if there is one lesson I finally learned, it is that urgency is not an emergency just because someone else ignored the calendar. When I did pick up, I kept my voice steady and said I was not available for a lecture, but if he had a specific question about a bill with his name on it, I would listen. And there was a long pause while he realized that the script where he barks and I scramble had been retired without his consent. He tried to start with the usual father voice about family obligations and how he assumed the balance was a mistake and how the bank must have switched something without warning, and I said the bank did not switch anything and nothing was a mistake, and he did not need to perform confusion for me because the truth was simple. The third-party payer withdrew. And from now on the borrower would speak to the lender directly, and if he wanted help navigating that conversation he could ask, but he would have to ask in the actual language of a request, not a decree. Hannah called right after, not even pretending to breathe between phrases, crying that her loan had sent a delinquency warning and that she only needed a bridge until her bonus hit, and that she would pay me back within a week and that I was putting her credit at risk out of spite. And I told her as calmly as I could that no one was punishing her, that this was a boundary, and that I had already assembled a clean timeline with steps she could take today to stabilize the account without me, including a hardship plan she could request, an automatic debit program with a modest rate reduction, and a budget line that suggested she press pause on the lifestyle upgrades she flaunted on the family chat. She tried to laugh it off and asked whether I expected her to sell the bag she bought to celebrate her promotion, and I said that would be a start, and that if she wanted to live like a star she could do it on income she actually had, not the fantasy version she rehearsed for our parents. And she called me cruel, and I said I was being honest, and that if she wanted me to carry the weight again, she would have to say the quiet thing out loud, which is that she had been living off a net she pretended she never needed. My mother came last with the kindest voice and the sharpest hook, asking whether we could just smooth things over until the new year and maybe sit down together with receipts after the holidays so no one has to feel embarrassed. And I told her I was done smoothing over anything, that I would sit down, but not to absorb blame or to quietly plug holes while everyone else pretended it was raining, that I would bring my records and my boundaries, and that we would look at the truth with both eyes open. She sighed and said I had always been stubborn, and I said I had always been available, which is not the same thing as obedient, and that if they wanted my help they would acknowledge my work in front of the same table where my father performed his jokes, because I am not interested in private gratitude after public humiliation. She said that felt like extortion, and I said it felt like accountability, and that if the word embarrassed her more than the behavior that required it, that was her work to do, not mine. Just to make sure no one confused silence with consent again, I took the last practical steps that close out a chapter cleanly, freezing my credit so nothing could be opened in my name during a panic, removing my information from every profile where I had once been the emergency contact, and drafting a brief note to the loan and mortgage servicers stating that all communication should go to the named borrowers and that I would not be fielding escalations. And when the auto reply confirmed receipt, I felt that same click in my chest that tells you a door is shut and latched and not waiting to drift open again when the wind changes. The calls kept coming in waves that afternoon, pride lowering itself into bargaining and then stumbling into anger, as if we were all walking through a script someone else wrote, and through it I kept repeating the only sentence that matters now: that I am available for conversations conducted in the language of truth and respect, and that my terms are simple and public and fair. By evening my father tried one last move, the one where he threatened to cut me off from help I never asked for, and I could not help it. I laughed, because there is nothing of his that I use, not his money, not his approval, not his borrowed reputation. And I told him so without heat, and I said that if he wanted my help salvaging the mortgage, I could show him exactly how to call, exactly what to ask for, and exactly which discretionary purchases to suspend, and that I would do it with him if he could say a single truth at the next family dinner in front of Hannah and my mother, the truth that the person he calls unserious has been the reason he could afford to perform seriousness for years. He went silent long enough that I thought the line had died, then he said he would think about it, which is the closest thing to humility I have heard from him in a very long time, and I told him to put Saturday on his calendar, because I would be there with a neat folder and a simple plan, and if he wanted a miracle, he would have to bring his own apology, and I hung up feeling the room tilt in my favor for the first time in years, with one last move sitting in my bag that they are not ready for yet, and that I am very ready to play. I showed up on Saturday with the same calm I use when I am about to negotiate on behalf of a client, and I put the folder on the table without ceremony, because there was no need to dress it up. And while my father hovered the way he does when he thinks he is about to be cornered, I told him I would make this simple, that I had brought the full record of every payment I had made on the house, the insurance, the taxes, and the loan my sister celebrated like a trophy while quietly letting it wobble, and that I had also brought a plan that would stop the bleeding today without me stepping back into the role of unpaid fixer, and that the plan came with terms as clean as a line on a page, which were respect in public, honesty in private, and a permanent end to the family sport of using me for structure while calling me the one who never grew up. He tried to shrug it off with a joke about paperwork, and my mother told me we could all be kinder if we just reset the tone, but I said we were past tone, we were at facts, and that facts have a way of clearing the air faster than apologies do. I opened the folder and slid the first packet to him with the totals and the dates and the confirmation codes that belonged to my name, and I watched him read the numbers the way a person reads a verdict he did not expect. And before he could reach for the one script he knows, the one where he accuses me of keeping score, I said that keeping records is not keeping score, that it is what responsible adults do when they are carrying other people's weight, and that if the word responsible lands on me only when it suits him, then we are not speaking the same language and I am not translating anymore. Hannah tried to interrupt with a question about whether I was really going to let her credit take a hit when a promotion had just made her a so-called executive, and I said that promotions do not refinance loans, payments do, and that my plan did not involve humiliation or chaos. It involved a one-time catch-up on the mortgage this afternoon to stop the late fees from rolling, a referral to the servicer's hardship team for a temporary modification that he could request himself, and a written schedule for Hannah with a frozen interest rate and automatic debits she could actually afford. If and only if my father did one thing that costs nothing and changes everything, which is tell the truth out loud in front of the same people who heard him talk down to me at Christmas dinner. He looked at my mother for help, and she looked at the table because she knows what I have carried, even if she never wanted to say it, and he finally asked what exactly I wanted him to say, and I told him I wanted one sentence, spoken in a normal voice with no sigh at the end, which goes like this: I called my daughter unserious while she kept this family upright, and I am sorry. And then I wanted him to ask me, with the same voice he uses when he asks a banker for a favor, whether I would walk him through the call he needed to make so he could stop pretending the bank was the problem and start being the borrower on his own loan. He asked whether I was recording him, and I said I did not need a recording, that I needed a baseline for how we talked to each other from this day forward, and that once it was said I would do the part one promised. Which I could do because, unlike the story he prefers, I am not broke, I am not stuck, and I am not playing for pity. He cleared his throat and tried to wrap it in a lesson about family unity. Then he stopped, and, to his credit, he said the line exactly once with no sarcasm, and there was a moment where the room felt strangely quiet, not heavy, just honest. And before anyone could take it back with humor, I opened my laptop, logged into the account that had replaced the old pipeline I shut down, and I executed the one-time mortgage catch-up I told them I would do if he met the terms, and I sent the confirmation to his email while he watched me type. Then I dialed the servicer on speaker and handed him the script I had written in simple phrases so he would not wander, and I sat next to him while he told the truth to a stranger whose only job is to document it. And I waited through the hold music until the modification review was on the calendar for the following week. When we hung up, Hannah started the song about paying me back in a week after her bonus settled, and I told her I had already drafted a zero-interest payment plan with automatic debits that she could sign today, and that if she missed a single pull, the document would forward a notification to our parents so that I would never again be the only adult in the room holding the facts. And she said that felt punitive, and I said it felt like adulthood, and she signed, which tells you everything about the difference between pride and relief. Then I pulled out the last envelope, the one labeled with my name, and I told them this was the part that mattered most to me, that the money was never the point. The point was who I become when I stop pretending to be smaller to keep the peace. And I told them I had moved the funds I used to keep their life balanced into an account set aside for a down payment on a new office for the business they refused to learn about, and that I had signed a lease with an option to buy the unit next door to a client who treats me like a partner instead of an errand girl, and that this was not a threat or a punishment. It was a declaration that going forward my work pays for my life, not for their denial. My father asked whether that meant I was abandoning the family, and I said no. It means I finally joined it as an equal, and that if he wanted to feel abandoned, he could ask himself why the person he called immature just kept his roof from sprouting a hole. Then I stood up because there was nothing else to explain, and I told them I would see them at Easter, and that if he felt like making a toast, he could make it to progress, not perfection. And as I reached the door, Hannah called after me to ask whether I was serious about never turning the old autopays back on. And I said I was serious about living like the grown woman I already am, and that the table would stay quiet as long as the truth stayed loud. And I closed the door knowing the last move had already landed, which was never the transfer. It was the moment they understood I did not need their celebration to be complete.